Hi, this is Dr. Graves, and this is a replacement lecture for the Economic Geography chapter in 2018. I'll be out of town, so this is what we'll do instead of meeting in class. So let's go ahead and get started. There'll probably be 3 or 4 short videos, 15 minutes long, about for each of the sections. It's a little less than you'd probably get if you were in class, but this is so introducing the topic. You just should know that economics totally fundamental to understand that. If you're going to understand society, what a lot of people don't seem to understand, though, is the role of space, distance, and location, and how critical they are in understanding the function of the economy. Economic geography is an entire field to itself, and we have in the geography department upper division courses that I mostly teach about essentially what's you're going to be introduced to in this particular lecture, series of lectures, entire courses. So if you really like this, consider taking economic geography. A couple of things that I want to throw out there is that when you take standard economics, one of the kind of economic thinking or economic ideas that you won't really hear much about is Marxism or historical materialism. Most of the time on this campus, most of the economists are straight up neoliberal economists, which is to say that they're conservative in their thinking and believe in a more or less straight up interpretation of the way the economy functions and the way people function, and it's not a politicized version. Social scientists are far more interested in the politicized and culturally contextualization that Marxism places around the economy. So I would encourage you, if you are want to keep people in the economy, the social in the social science, that you should become aware of the role of the economy in not only creating society, but also the politics of the economy and how all of that works together. And once again, this is an entire course or multiple courses on Marxist geography, Marxist economic principles, but we won't really have time to do that. We'll glance over it here and there during the course of this lecture. The other thing that you should also be aware of, as we've seen other deterministic viewpoints during the semester, economic determinism is also a danger in that it's reasonably easy to think of the economy as really the deterministic or driving force behind everything, when in fact there's a lot of areas in which the economy doesn't do a good job of explaining things. So sometimes I will favor a kind of economic determinism in my lectures, and then I'll have to remind myself, hold on, it's not that powerful. And the reason that I'll throw out is that people are, in my opinion, highly economically irrational, that oftentimes we do things that make no sense at all economically. And not only is that, it's quite common, and that is why a lot of economic analyses really have to contextualize people as they are, not as we suppose they should be. On to the background. We'll look at 3 sectors of the economy, but before we get to these 3 sectors, let's talk about some very basic vocabulary. The first word that I want you to look at here is this one, autarky. Autarky is a term that characterizes countries or areas, regions that don't trade with outside areas. They try to be completely self-sufficient, which is has been tried here and there. The communist bloc of the Soviet Union tried it in the 50s. North Korea is probably the one country that's kind of trying to do it now, partly by choice, but partly because of all of the economic sanctions around that country. The opposite of it is trade, or particularly free trade, open borders. You'll trade with anybody for anything, and a lot of the world's countries have versions of this. Most people try to do a little bit somewhere in between complete autarky and complete free trade. When you trade, you fuel what are called basic industries. So basic industries, like what you see here, are those industries that produce something for export that you don't consume most of it at home. So in this old slide photo from Minnesota, they're exporting logs to somewhere for timber, perhaps in Kansas or someplace that doesn't have great tree resources. And so basic industries are very important because out goes commodities, goods of some sort, sometimes services, and in comes money. So every town, every city, every state, every country basically needs basic industries. They need money to come in. Non-basic industries are those things like your dentist. They're a lot of times services or occasionally manufacturing of things that are consumed within the local area. So it is circulating money within the economy is the basic industries, but or the non-basic industries, that's this, and the basic industries is once again just money coming in from outside. So if you were to match these, that basic industries are export industries. Most of the time, the basic industries of lots of places start with the primary sector, and these are extractive industries, things that take wealth or goods out of the ground. So I've got a picture of a oil well here in Tyler, Texas, and Texas makes a lot of money by pumping stuff out of the ground and selling it elsewhere. And this is a key to national, regional, or local wealth for lots of places if, and we've got to put an asterisk next to that, if they can hold on to the profits. The other element that's great about primary sector work is that a lot of times it will spur on manufacturing. So if you think about what would be spurred on by oil, well, then that's oil refining and something like the plastics industry. My sister used to work over there in a plastics factory, and you need oil for plastic. And so plastics and geochemical factories of all sorts are oftentimes near this extractive industry oil well. The problems, of course, with this a lot of times is what kind of damage are you doing to the environment? You're pulling stuff out of the ground that perhaps shouldn't be, and it takes great care not to do long-term permanent damage to the environment. And a lot of the world's most polluted places are those that rely heavily on extractive industries. The other problem with extractive industries is for a lot of places, they are unable to control the resource locally. So it's great if you've got an oil well in your town or multiple oil wells, but if the profits all leave and go somewhere else, then the wealth doesn't stay there, but maybe the environmental issues are remain. And so a state like West Virginia, which has had enormous coal wealth extracted from it for many years in this country, is an excellent example of a place that has is one of the most poverty stricken areas in the United States, despite the fact that billions of dollars worth of coal have been extracted from it. And what they've been left with is many times environmental catastrophe, but without the wealth. They got short-term jobs that they were happy to have, but most of the big money left and wound up on Wall Street somewhere in the hands of investors that provided the capital or the money to open the mines. And even if the locals began it themselves, once they got wealthy, they probably left and took the profits with them. I want you to think about what kind of primary industries do we have in Los Angeles, because we do have quite a bit of that. And here are some of them. If you have driven down the 405, or if you've been down in the Crenshaw district and you looked up in Baldwin Hills, you might have seen this site. Lots of oil wells still producing here in Los Angeles, hopefully with a low threat of environmental damage, but there is some. This is an image of down around the Long Beach area back in the 1920s and 30s, when LA Basin was the top oil producing location in the country. Of course, this is all sort of tapped out now, so hopefully that money stayed locally and spurred on the economy in other ways. But it's you can still find some interesting bits and pieces of the oil industry still here, even over, say, in Beverly Hills or the west side of Los Angeles. That's actually an oil derrick that is tastefully decorated and hidden. So we still do a lot of this. The other sorts of things that we draw out of the ground are things that are agriculturally related. So we still pick oranges and those sorts of things. There may be some fishing industry, that kind of stuff, that's still here. Agriculture is California's largest industry, and again, it's all extracting wealth out of the ground, and if it's managed correctly, it's a great sustainable source of wealth that goes on, but if it's done poorly, it can be catastrophic. Once again, come back to coal mining. Here is a highly polluted coal slag pond in Alabama that I visited many years ago. Some of the towns that relied upon coal companies are some of the worst off locations in the United States in terms of poverty, the health of the residents, the long-term damage to the environment, those sorts of things. We saw these areas highlighted in the health chapter. The highest rates of disability, long-term disability, the highest rate of opioid overdoses, and that sort of thing. This term is, I really want you to focus on, is the multiplier leakage. That means that there are profits generated, but they leave the local area for other locations. It's the opposite of the multiplier effect, which is something good. The other problem that we see with West Virginia is a lack of economic diversification. The money that was generated wasn't put right back into the economy, into things like good schools and training, so that people could do something other than coal mining once all of the coal was gone, or once environmental conditions rendered the industry bad. Are there similar industries? Yeah, there are lots of them that do things just like coal mining, oil, logging, timber industries. Lots of things leave long-term impacts in favor of short-term job creation. And that marks the end of the first segment of this lecture.